really thank Dan for that chat. That was really, really good. Anyone who fishes a lake, I think, a big round of applause for Dan. That was excellent, mate. And I've been lucky enough to go for a fish with him before. He knows his stuff, and the great thing about what I get to do for a job day in, day out is to fish with guys like Dan and just pick up so much. And fishing's one of those fantastic pastimes where you'll die one day and you don't know everything, which is bloody awesome. In a world where we think we know so much, fishing is just so great that we can just learn off each other, which is awesome. As Jonathan said, I think this is Series 11, a real action that's kicking off at the end of next month. We're really proud of where we've got to there. I've been filming fishing for a long time, worked for ET for nearly 7.5 years before I started my show, and just love my fishing. I've always loved it, and probably 25 years ago now, I got heavily involved actually with snapper soft plastic fishing, and that's what I'm going to talk about tonight. With another mate, Mark Phillips. I think it's about 25 years. We're trying to work out, and just want to say a big hello to Mitch Burt there, the boss of Pure Fishing. It's great to have you here tonight too, Mitch. But super proud of my relationship with those guys, and so lucky back in the day to start to be on the forefront of a craze that just really not only went through the whole east coast of Australia and South Australia, Victoria and Western Australia, but it was crazy in New Zealand, and myself and Mark Phillips went to New Zealand and really got the whole snapper soft plastic thing kicked off. And this is back in the days when we were using Berkeley drop shot rods and little cardinal reels, and braided line was this hideous stuff that was really springy, and I know Berkeley Fireline, even back then we were testing it, and it'd be 10-pound braid, it'd break at about 43 pounds. It was amazing stuff, and there was no FG knot back then. We were tying double uni knots, and fluorocarbon leader was sort of coming to the fore, and it was really cool, as I said, to be at the front of something that involved a fish species like snapper, which was seen as a bread and butter table fish. It was a fish that we threw burley out for, and I still love doing that, don't get me wrong, and floating baits down a burley trail and having the rod scream off and wind it in, and yep, let's kill that one and put it in the ice, and let's kill that one and let's kill these big fish as well. And to see them morph into a sport fish, much like what happened, and I'm sure Starlo will talk about a little bit when he gets up to, with the brim scene, where the reflection of the American fishing market saw brim suddenly become a sport fish when it was always a table fish. Well, it was great to see that for snapper, and I'm so proud of all of you anglers out there now who see snapper in a different light. And if you catch a big fish, big snapper, and along the same lines with Dan with the big flathead, where we're all got a phone, we've got a camera, we can take a photo of it and watch it swim off, is a pretty cool thing. And anyone who's ever caught a big snapper and that feeling of seeing it come up through the water, it's a pretty awesome thing. But going from monofilament or nylon line, when we used to fish for them, and suddenly turn them into this sport fish with light, high modulus rods with a lot of carbon in them, with lines with no stretch, so those big bumping head shakes, you can feel all that. It was a really cool feeling. And these days, the rods have we've got specialised snapper plastic rods, and certainly soft plastics that are really designed for that. And I still probably enjoy doing that more than anything else. And there's some techniques that really help with that. And one of the things we worked out, and it's funny, Dan spoke about stealth for mulloway in shallow water. Snapper are really wary fish, and anyone who's ever been diving and seen them swimming around, they're quite a timid fish, and they're a fish that will take off. And certainly your smaller fish, they'll hang around and you can catch those vertically, but your big trophy fish, and I've got a couple of videos there with a couple of nice ones that we'll have a look at, they're quite a timid fish. They're a fish that when we first started fishing for them, we were thinking, they sit, they're way down deep in around the reef structure. They don't really come up, and it wasn't until you got your burley going you could bring them up. But as we learned, early in the morning, late in the evening, around the tide changes, they're one fish that sits really, really high in the water column, a lot higher than we ever thought. So in 20 metres, I've actually caught them just under the water surface in 20 metres, in 30 metres of water. So they will move up and down in the water column. And I think that was a big thing that we learned early on, and the fact that we started fishing with 5/8 of an ounce jig heads and half-ounce jig heads, and then went down to a quarter and a twelfth, really, really light, and tried to present a lure that was just slowly fluttering down through the system. And I think that's really important. Let's just have a quick look at this first video. Taylor, you're right to go. But I guess what I'm getting at there is there's a shallow, small area of reef, and once again, it's all about that stealthy approach. So what I actually did there is use the electric motor to pull up and keep my lures working into a current flow that was working up over a shallow reef, and target some better fish. And it's a really good way of keeping your lures in an area that's quite tightly packed. It's different if you're drifting over a big shallow reef area and you want to cover a lot of ground, which is what we do a lot of time when we're chasing snapper. But in this area here, it's one of those great things where I had a tide change just as the sun came up. Filming the TV show, we're always looking for a quality fish, and this was a great way to start the day. But actually creeping backwards with the electric motor, which is funny, it's exactly what Dan was saying about targeting those big flathead mulloway in the lake, was what we wanted to do here. So it was putting our casts in, casting back up current, hopping the plastics down, using quite light jig heads, and then stepping back to try and find a quality fish, and that's what we've come up with here. But you don't have to have an electric motor to do this. It does definitely help if you've got some local knowledge, and if you don't, your GPS chart is probably more important quite often than your sounder, where you need to understand the structure, the reef structure that you've got. If you understand predators, whether it be a snapper like this or a kingfish or a Spanish mackerel, it doesn't really matter what it is, they all feed on pressure points. So the biggest thing to think about is any reef structure you've got. So whether you're fishing down off the Doctor's Reef at Waibung here, or up off Redhead, or wherever you are, whenever there's current flow and some pressure on the reef, they're the areas where the fish sit. So snapper will sit right on the edge of the reef wherever the sand is or the gravel and it meets the reef. That's your pressure area, and that's the place that you need to target. And if you're targeting a big fish like that, and you need to head back upstream and you're going to drift through, and this time of year we have predominantly westerly winds in the morning, as we know, sou'westers, occasionally a nor'wester, but generally a westerly wind, and that can work really well. Because what you'll find is that you'll either have a downhill or an uphill current, but most of the headlands that we fish, whether you're fishing out of Coffs Harbour or Port Macquarie, wherever it is, the reef runs from the west to the east. So it continues on. If you look at a headland, you'll generally find most of your reefy spots, if you use Waibung Head, for example, the reef runs the same direction out to the east. So with a westerly wind or a sou'wester, you can generally drift along that front pressure edge. So that's a really good tip for chasing snapper, where the bait's sitting, where all the pressure is, that's where those predators are. And you'll find less and less fish on the back edge of the reef. So once you drift over, and another thing to do there, so in that video I was using my electric motor and hopping around, but as you drift over, then I would take a massive wide line. You do not want to turn around and drive straight back over your drift line. If you want to catch quality fish, you've got to sneak up on them a little bit. There are anomalies, but I've got to tell you, it's going right around, taking the time to go right around, nice and quietly, and then drift through. And then if you look at your chart on your GPS, you can create a drift line, a bit like the boys out west where I go pig hunting on the wheat fields. They've got GPSs and they plough the paddocks. The same deal. Go around. If you had a successful drift on that one, take the same line again. If you go, that was a bit quieter, we got a couple of small fish, go back around and have a drift through. But when you've got predominantly westerly winds this time of year, to be able to drift along the pressure edge is definitely the way to go. We'll have a look at this next video. I didn't realise I'd have to commentate through these, but just before Taylor starts this one, I've got a spot up the road where I was fishing, and for a few years I'd been targeting some really big fish, but only in shallow water, in 2 metres of water, just as the sun comes up, and I'd had my arse handed to me about 5 times. Like, I mean, proper been dusted by some big snapper, and anyway, I generally fish, I'll talk about tackle in a minute, but I generally fish 15-pound braid and 20-pound leader during the day, and then I'll upgrade to 20-pound braid and maybe some 30-pound leader. But you get less bites, as simple as that. The heavier leader you go and the heavier you fish, the less bites you get. And I love the battle of hooking a fish on that light tackle and trying to land it. But there's some areas you've just got to lock and load and go hard to land the big fish. So this spot where I was fishing, I'd hooked some big snapper and just been busted off in really shallow water. And we were fishing just around one side of this island early in the morning, making TV, and we caught a couple of nice fish around that sort of 3 kilo mark. And just as I was about to go around the corner, these guys turned up in another boat, as they're allowed to do, and we were just coming around, and it's like, oh, bugger, damn, right in this bit of a washy zone that I wanted to cast into. And they were casting whole garfish into the wash. So they're casting them into the wash, and we sort of sat off, and I was watching them. Anyway, I didn't get a bite, and they moved. So I thought, oh, you beauty, we'll dive in there. First cast, and you'll have a look in a minute, I hooked this massive big snapper. And it wasn't until later on, probably a month later, this guy contacted me on social media and he said, so as I hooked up, they just disappeared, didn't even look back at us. But then he saw the TV show and saw, and he'd seen us fishing there that day and he saw the size of the snapper that we caught. He was pretty disappointed that they'd headed off. But have a look at this anyway. That's what my old mate Barney, if you've ever watched Real Action, he's a legendary guy, Barney, concreter. He's got hands like bricks and feet are the same. But so I've hooked this really big fish in 2 metres of water and probably fished that rod and reel, I reckon, as hard as it could possibly go without busting anything off. You can see there I've even got my hand on the spool trying to turn this fish and keep it from doing me in the rocks. And I'm pretty proud of this one. There's a few fish that you get to catch over the years where you fish the gear as hard as it will go. And when I say that, the leader, the knot that you've tied, the loop knot you've tied onto the jig head, the rod, everything to the max to land one of those really big fish. And this fish is quite a large one. It was just under 1 metre long, that fish, and you can see how heavily built it is. So it's a really big fish and would probably be somewhere around that 10.5 kilo mark, 10 kilos. That's quite a large snapper, that one there. But the fact that I landed it in that really sort of shallow area was pretty cool. So that's another big one. So that's another one of those areas that can fish so well at certain times of year, and that's those washy areas in and around headlands and islands. So if you get a period, and even out of Swansea here, the best time to fish, I reckon, any of these headlands up at Redhead, Merriweather, back down south Catherine Hill Bays after a really big swell. So that's when I'd be going. So if we get an east coast low or something and we've got 4 or 5 metre swells come crashing in, snapper are one of those fish that just love to feed on crabs and lobsters that have been busted up and cungy and sea urchins, all that sort of stuff. They'll be right in there. So if you're a keen lure fisherman or you're wanting to get into chucking or casting lures for snapper in this area and you're fishing out of Swansea, I would be waiting for that big swell. This time of year when it's crystal clear and you want to be there as the sun's coming up, and you'll find your bite window falls away quite quickly. It can be quite tough in those really shallow areas, but get a bit of swell, a bit of a stir up. That's a great time to go for a fish for a snapper. Do you want to jump into some questions, Jono?
Yeah, some questions. We've got food coming out very, very shortly. Yep. If you could manipulate, I'm going to start, I know a few hands here. If you could manipulate the weather apps to display whatever you want if you're going snapper fishing, give us your ideal conditions.
Yeah, absolutely. So moon phase is huge. So the last 3 days before a new moon is when, if I'm looking at my Real Action diary and I'm saying, right, we want to get a really good snapper show filmed, I'm looking at new moons anywhere from May through to October. So in this part of the world, snapper love to spawn in about 18.5 to 19.3 degrees is sort of that magic window. We get a bit cooler soon, but at the moment we've got that 18.5, 19 degrees, and then it sort of picks up again a little bit later on. But that last 3 to 4 days onto the new moon, they tend to come in really, really shallow. Barometric pressure, like all fishing, does play a part. If you can get a nice even barometer in around that new moon, with a bit of current too. I love water flow. Snapper love water flow because it will sort of push them into one part of the reef, and not that's what I'm looking for.
Will you fish burley when you're fishing with plastics?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. And yeah, so gentleman's just asked if you didn't hear, would I fish burley when I'm plastic fishing? No, I don't. But will I throw a soft plastic around because I've got ADHD? Absolutely. If I've got the burley trail going and I've got baits out, mate, I'll be throwing a plastic. And if you've never fished soft plastics before and you're a general bait fisherman for snapper, absolutely, I would be doing that. So if you're anchored up, traditional method, anchored up, you've got the burley trail going, then you can lightly weight a soft plastic and swim it down, give it a twitch, or throw it up current with a slightly heavier jig head, sink it down and twitch it. And once you get the bug and you've hooked one on a lure, I've got to tell you, that's probably more. You'll do more of that than you will chasing them on bait. You've lost 2, all right, mate. 3 times lucky. So how's that sound? You've won a packet of soft plastics, bud. So there you go. That's the go. Yeah, for sure. They're probably more of a bycatch at times. I have targeted them a little bit at times on smaller profile soft plastics, sort of 5-inch jerk shads. Seem to work well in the lake, but the same technique works, and it's really quite. I've probably done better in the northern end of the lake throwing 5-inch jerk shads when it's quite rough and windy in a southerly, like quite rough conditions. I'm not sure what it is about snapper and wind and and a bit of breaking water on the top. But I find them as a bit more of a bycatch on lures in the lake. Probably the biggest ones I've caught have when I've been chasing mulloway and flathead on vibes, and I've caught them up to 60 odd centimetres, which is quite nice. But I've heard of some much bigger ones. Next question.
Yeah, we've got a few. Yeah, go on.
What's your theory on the new moon?
What?
New moon.
What's my theory on the new moon? The darker the moon, I'm not really sure why the snapper like that, but you'll find a lot of demersal fish like to get together and spawn on the new moon. So, for example, Queensland fisheries have what they call finfish closures in and around the new moon for demersal fish. So when I talked about demersal fish, we're talking red emperor, coral trout, all of those reef species. And snapper are the same. They just seem to come in shallow, do their thing, hang out together, and then they sort of dissipate after that. So you'll still catch them right through the moon phase, but I find those shallow reefs, they definitely congregate on the dark of the moon.
Paul? Yeah, go on.
The snapper, chase them off like land-based. Same sort of technique.
Yeah, absolutely. And mate, I'd applaud you if you can catch a really big snapper land-based on a soft plastic. I reckon that's a goal. It's something that I haven't done, so brother, you and I might have to go and do that. But I absolutely, I think your low light conditions are definitely the peak period. Anyone who's done much snapper fishing knows when the sky's red in the afternoon, that's a great time to be doing it. But land-based, if you did have a big swell, as long as it's dropped off and it's safe to do so, that is definitely the time. And they will be right in against the rocks. And if anyone here is a diver or a spear fisherman, that's when you hear the boys say straight after, that's when the snapper will be in close. So yeah, it'd be a great technique. It's one of those things you can get snagged up, but I would urge you to sort of scale down on your jig head size. Maybe you can go to a 16th, something quite light. And the great thing about this time of year, quite often you've got that westerly wind in your back, so it'll give you a bit of a wind-assisted cast to cover a bit more water.
And what are you looking for in regards to that headland?
It's generally access to deep water, and if you've got shallow inshore reef out from there, so say you had a headland that just drops straight onto the sand and it's sand out the front, that's probably not a great place to target snapper. So it's somewhere where there's shallow reef that continues out, or there's access to shallow reef is generally the places to go. The headlands that just drop straight onto the sand, not so much.
Yeah, yes, you've got one here. Sorry, I got the microphone ready because I can tell your ears are fading in your old age, man. Here we go.
Yes, look, in South Australia, in certain parts, they get monster snapper, but to achieve that, they often have a closed season. Do you think that would benefit New South Wales if we did that sort of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it would. I think we're behind the times a little bit with some of our fisheries regulations in New South Wales. As I've already mentioned, Queensland have a finfish closure to try and let those demersal fish breed and spawn. And I'd urge you too, if you do target snapper around the new moon this time of year, those big fish, let them go. They're not great to eat. I love eating fish, don't get me wrong, and a 2 kilo snapper is a great fish to eat, but those big fish, like these ones that I've just caught there, they're big fish. Let them go. They're our breeders, but I think we would definitely do well. The trouble with New South Wales coastline is that you'll find that ideal temperature, that 18 to 19, is different from where Starlo comes from. For example, down south, it might be more of a November time when they would spawn there. You find in Port Phillip Bay in Melbourne, it's a November period when they sort of all stack up in there. So we might have to have spawning closure patches in different areas of New South Wales. So Wooleye, for example, August is a great time for the fish around Wooleye. But I think it would be great to have a no-take zone during some of those spawning periods, not only for us rec anglers, but certainly for the commercial sector as well, and that's probably even bigger.
I'm just wondering, do you think the smaller fish sit with the big fish, or do you think with snapper the bigger fish seem to sit a bit away from the smaller school fish?
Yeah, look, I think that's a great question. I think you do definitely get mixed schools at times, but generally looking at sounder pictures, you'll find that a better class of fish seems to hang out together, where you'll get those sort of 3 kilo fish, and then there'll be quite a couple of bigger fish that will sit with those. But those smaller fish tend to hang away a little bit. Yeah, you don't tend to catch the kilo ones so much with the bigger ones. I think the bigger fish, to really target them, those tide changes, and if you can get a tide change that's thanks for that. If you get a tide change that's in that window, that low light window, early in the morning, late in the evening, if you can get that together, so if you've got a high tide at 7 o'clock in the morning, that's perfect, and just as the sun's coming up. then those fish will be right up high in the column. And it seems to be those big fish that come up higher in the water column, if that makes sense. Smaller fish, I guess because their body structure's smaller, maybe they're more worried about sharks and other predators. But those big fish, those big cranky things, I don't know if you've ever seen any Vision. There's some great stuff of a place called Julian Rocks. I don't know if you've ever seen that. And you see the mulloway and snapper just milling around in the middle of the day, but so high in the water column. That's one thing that I've learned a lot about snapper.